Have you ever been called on to read aloud in class, asked to do something that you're unfamiliar with, or been really unprepared for a test and had an anxiety attack? If you aren't sure, anxiety attacks could be described as one of the worst sensations a person can experience. Anxiety attacks have many symptoms, including sweating, rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, chest pains, crying, and nausea. Maybe a couple of you are now realizing that you have indeed experienced this. Turns out, we can help kids to keep from feeling this, or even make it more short-lived. How many of you are going into education, psychology, or another social career? This is the information that you might want to know. Social anxiety affects people of many ages and backgrounds. Two people in my five immediate family suffer from social anxiety in some degree. I, for example, used to suffer from almost debilitating anxiety, but I've learned to manage my anxiety and have the courage to speak in front of you all right now. I can remember being in kindergarten and the teacher calling me to count to 5s to 25. I began to hyperventilate, feeling my heart beat so hard that I could hear it in my ears, and I could feel my eyes beginning to well up with tears. My teacher began to get angry with me because I couldn't even get out the words, and I was punished for not knowing them. That memory is still seared in my head as one of the most humiliating moments of my childhood. In first grade, I went to a little bit bigger school in West Fargo, North Dakota. My class was double what it was in the kindergarten center. During my first week, I left class to go to the library. I knew libraries were quiet, and I recognized how overloaded I was. After that, I was taken by a teacher individually, once or twice a day, to help with my anxiety. It did help, but not enough to get me out of my shell, enough to play with kids that I didn't know. I had the same issue with social interactions and unfamiliar situations most of my life. I still have a hard time sitting in class all day without going to my room and needing to decompress, as not to have an anxiety attack. So, my senior year, imagine my horror when I was placed in a speech class. Throughout the semester, I felt public speaking become easier. For my final speech, I evaluated Susan Cain's The Power of Introverts, which I'm going to do again now. In April 2014, Susan Cain was welcomed onto the TED Talk stage. TED is a nonprofit devoted to spreading ideas, usually in the form of short, powerful talks. Susan Cain's speech, titled Announcing the Quiet Revolution, is a great speech in the idea that she was trying to get across. The idea that Cain was trying to convey is that introversion is just as good as extroversion, despite what today's society seems to tell us. Cain uses ethos, guiding beliefs of the teacher, of the reader, logos, the facts, and pathos, the emotions, which are part of Aristotle's rhetoric. I'll be using Aristotle's rhetoric to analyze her speech, along with Bitzer's rhetorical situation. She starts off with a simple exercise to demonstrate the difference between introversion and extroversion. Let's do something fun and unusual for the TED Talk stage. I want you to break into groups of 4 and have each of you tell a childhood story that reveals whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. Then I'll ask each group to select the most personal, poignant, and private of these stories to share with the audience. And from this collaborative group process, a larger truth will emerge. Just kidding. Really, just kidding. We're not going to do that. But how many of you are feeling like, how can I get out of here right now without insulting the speaker? That's how so many introverts feel about the team-building exercises that we're obliged to forever participate in. When Cain said this portion, she hit the nail right on the head. Introverts are commonly portrayed as antisocial people, which is only half true. Introversion is a trait of people who gain energy by being alone. The inverse is extroversion. These people thrive off the company of others. Group activities are loved by extroverts and dreaded by introverts. The audience was shown which one of them each of them was. She also did this in her book, which she talks about a bit later in her speech. Thousands of strangers started sharing their own stories of accepting their introversion for the first time. These stories changed my life course. I'll tell you about that in a minute. First, some of the stories. There was a high school junior in Kansas who twisted herself into a pretzel trying to be a leader, but she was kicked off her school's prestigious leadership squad because she wasn't outgoing enough. She was devastated, but told me that the TED Talk reminded her what she would have preferred to do in the first place, which was science. her version of leadership, publishing her first scientific paper at 17, winning a huge university scholarship, and today she's a happy freshman majoring in biomedical engineering. Next, there's an Ivy League president, a Fortune 500 CEO, and a Marine Corps general who all confessed that introversion was their secret, and their secret strength. There was a quiet teacher who convinced her entire school to rethink its emphasis on class participation and group projects. There was even a lonely young guy who decided not to commit suicide because he finally realized there was a place for him in this world. Today, believe it or not, he's happy, productive, and in a loving marriage. Turns out, embracing their quiet nature does not cause introverts to flee to a shack in the woods. It empowers them to engage with the world, but on their own terms. Kane provided a huge point with these words. All these people were leaders in their own way. Against society's expectations, they shone bright. The high school girl wasn't seen as outgoing enough, but is just as successful, if not more, than her peers. The men who were all highly regarded leaders made it to the top by using their introversion to their advantage. She continues on by stating her thoughts on the story shared with her. The section of Kane's speech shows a lot of pathos and ethos. In the race, she reaches out, using her emotions and beliefs to get to the readers. Logos is shown through the accomplishments in her stories. Ironically, these stories have the same effect on me. I found myself every morning with my laptop thinking of these souls, and writing not the sense of my next book, but the blueprint for a quiet revolution, and joining forces with a growing army of quiet revolutionaries, many of whom are extroverts with quiet colleagues, spouses, or children of their own. Together, we formed a venture-backed, mission-based company whose goal is to empower introverts for the benefit of us all. A third to a half of humanity is introverted. That's 1 out of every 2 or 3 people you know, so we're dreaming pretty big. We are empowering quiet children. The most poignant letters I get, the ones that haunt me, come from children who are hurting because the well-meaning adults in their life ask them, why can't you be a little more outgoing like your sister? And they know they can't be, and never will be. And letters come from moms and dads who are hurting because they hear repeatedly at parent-teacher conferences that the child is pretty great, but would be so much better if only he were that precious thing, talkative in class. Hundreds of schools, thousands of parents have reached out to us, clamoring for change. So in the next year, we'll be forming partnerships with schools to develop tools for parents and educators to cultivate their quiet children. One final story. There was once a boy so quiet and shy, he used to run home from school when the bell rang to avoid socializing with his classmates. Like many shy people, this boy sided instinctively with the oppressed. As he grew older, he learned to speak out on their behalf, but remained a shy and quiet man, believing that these traits were his source of spiritual strength. The boy's name was Mohandas Gandhi, and he later uttered for me the most important sentence in history. In a gentle way, you can shake the world. Kane's personal experiences with introverted leadership help connect the listener to the speech to see how they fit into the equation. Her telling us about all the letters she gets from kids and parents that dishearten her, and how she responds tells us that this is an issue. Kids who are quiet are told they will fail if they don't become more outgoing. She says that at one point, we can all join her revolution to let everyone become a leader. This portion shows ethos and pathos when she talks about that. So, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, I invite you to join our quiet revolution, and to consider that empowering the introverted half of the population will benefit us all. But most of all, I invite you to go out and shake the world gently. My teacher gave me her second 99% ever on a speech. I still have issues with one-on-one conversations at times, or doing anything that I haven't really experienced before, but I see a lot of my same struggles in my little brother. My little brother, Sully, will be 7 the day before Thanksgiving. My brother is the sweetest little boy. He's crazy and smart, and he's a rambunctious little kid. But he suffers from such bad social anxiety that my mom has been pushing his school to create some sort of program to help kids who have sensory issues. Sensory issues are usually described as an overload of noise, crowds, touch, texture, bright lights, or anything kind of similar to that. Sully suffers from noise, bright light, and crowd overstimulation mostly. He and I also have an issue with texture on our hands and our feet. Every day of school is his worst nightmare. Daily he comes home and needs to use one of his coping mechanisms. The most effective for him is his weighted blanket, his pea pod, or his body sock. All of which are simple items his school could be utilizing to help kids with social anxiety disorders. Even many high school and college students could probably appreciate larger replicas of these tools. So why aren't these tools being used in schools and other environments to help children and adults who are miserable from their daily lives? The reason my parents were giving was funding. They could put him in Title I classes, but since he doesn't have a learning disability, it wouldn't really do much for him. But many schools do indeed simply just put kids with social issues in Title I classes, also known as special ed classes. Social anxiety is something that everyone is most likely going to have to deal with, especially in any social type job. In fact, I'm sure many of you know a few people with social anxiety, whether you know it or not. So, in my opinion, we should all educate ourselves to make life a little bit easier for everyone, especially with children who don't know how to cope in typical situations.